Hello, this is Georgina Rose.
This is Nike.
This is Anthony.
This is Temperance.
And welcome to Magnolias and Magic. In this episode, we have returning guest host Temperance Alden, who is a longtime friend of the pod and former full-time host. We are thrilled to have her back. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about customizing your practice and making a completely original personal practice. So I find on this podcast we do a lot of commentary. And one topic that I haven't heard discussed as much recently, but is sort of one of the recurring discussions we have, is how to make your practice your own. In modernity, the majority of occult practitioners are solitary. Most of us are not in groups. There are, of course, many people who do choose to be in covens and orders, and even within those constraints, there are still ways to customize your practice and make it fully your own. But the average practitioner is on their own. And because of that, there's a lot of freedom to sort of, change things around, make it your own. And so we wanted to talk about, how that actually works. Temp here wrote an entire book on how to do this with the Wheel of the Year, so we thought it'd be perfect to have her on. But we wanted to talk about, how it works in relation to the Wheel of the Year, because that's, of course, what Temp has, written an entire book on. But we also wanted to talk about what are the values of being in a traditional framework. What is the value of being on your own? What do we gain by breaking away? What is the line and the dangers of doing this? Because when you are on your own, when you are using your own intuition, using your own judgment to make a personal practice, there are some risk there, ways that can sort of lead into spiritual bypassing or cutting corners, and ways that it can work really, really well. And we wanted to talk at the very end about our own experiences with this subject. So let's break into it.
I'm going to start us off with a take, which is, throwback to an older format of this podcast, where the very first thing out of the gate was someone giving some bad take. So here's the take, is that customized and personalized practices don't threaten constructed tradition. And so many people feel as though it does. So when we see someone online sharing how their practice deviates from the traditional standard or norm that we're used to seeing, you will see a slew of comments saying that they're doing something wrong, or they don't understand the concept, or XYZ, as though it were to threaten the established order that they already know, but it doesn't. Someone minding their own business, just sharing what they do personally, is no threat to the larger organized structure that some people would initiate into. Those are two separate practices, right? A person doing what they're doing, to be honest, they should probably be doing it in private if they don't want to receive the hate comments. But a person doing what they're doing by themselves, not really influencing anyone directly, does not threaten the established order.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I can speak for myself mostly, but I know that a lot of people I've spoken to online, their practices are very eclectic and completely deviate from tradition. There are traditional elements that they will follow where it's bits and pieces, but so much of it ends up being truly eclectic that I don't really know almost anyone that sticks wholly to tradition. It's pretty rare in this day and age, in part because they have so much access to technology and information that there's much less limitation on it. And with so many people being solitary, there's no order or hierarchy or structure, or in some cases solid book to follow directly. So I think it's a little silly for people to try to come out of the woodwork and say you're doing it wrong because you're not doing it like you're supposed to. With very few exceptions, on the whole, they're just doing it differently. They're not doing it wrong, and wrong for one tradition is right for another. So it's always a little odd to try to say distinctly this is wrong.
We've had a really big discussion about this within the Thalema sphere recently, because within Thalema for a very long time, the way to be a Thalemite was to go through a traditional group, typically one of two, either the OTO or the AA. However, right now, the majority of Thalemites are not in these groups, if you do the numbers. And so when you're part of a tradition that was so heavily based around these groups that even have, these groups have set degree structures. They have a progression of learning to them. But now, most people are solitary. They're not in these groups. And so us solitary Thelemites really have to sort of reckon with that. And a lot of people sort of, when they're solitary, really try to emulate that structure. I've seen people online will assign themselves degrees, which a degree is not, for those who don't know, a degree is a term for when you've gone through an initiation, you have a rank, right? Like there's degree 1, that's when you're at the bottom. Well, it really goes, it's Minerval, and then there's the next degree, and the next degree, and the next degree. And each higher degree signifies that you've made it further, right? And they have like little ways of marking them. You see on Thalemic social media, some people write it in their name. It'll be like, it'll look like an equation. It'll be a number equals another number. And that's sort of how they're stylized. But a lot of these solitary people have tried to assign themselves degrees, which I find very bizarre. And I think that it's something that holds us back, because if you read Crowley's writings on Thelema, obviously these degrees and the way that the progression works has value to it. But nowhere in Thelema does it argue that the point of doing your own will and finding your own true will is to perfectly replicate these groups. And as well, there have always been other Thelema adjacent groups, such as the Fraternity to Saturni, the entire time. You see Jack Parsons creating a tradition called the Witchcraft, which was literally posing Horus and Babylon as a god and goddess of Thelema. Like, there's always been deviation. So it's very weird seeing modern online Thelemites become so stuck to this way. And we're having a lot of conversations right now about what Thelema looks beyond where it's been, because we're sort of realizing, oh wait, almost all of us are solitary. Okay, how can we make Thelema work now? And it's been sort of, I don't want to call it like a schism or a referendum, because that's like a really dramatic way to put it, but it kind of has. There's been like a real, and it's been a lot of discussions. There's been a lot of, articles, a lot of conversations, but it's pretty clear like Thelema is going through some sort of change right now. And it's sort of been at the forefront of our community. And my belief has always been, if you want to follow that format, you can, but you're solitary. You don't have to. And as well, when you do these things on your own, you do self-initiations, which the Golden Dawn, a group that preceded Thelema, has had a self-initiation track for a long time. The Cicero lineage of the Golden Dawn created a self-initiation curriculum and have written books, so you can do it all in the comfort of your home. So people who preceded us have already done it. So it's a very interesting, it's a very interesting situation we're in. So it's definitely a big, big conversation in our community. And I've always been of the spirit of, you can follow the traditions as much as you want, but also you're not bound to it. You're not in the online occult Vatican room, okay? The whole point of being an occultist is to be a little bit of a heretic. So why not deviate?
It's interesting. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about Thelema specifically, because like to hit on Temperance's like original point of like traditions feeling threatened by people deviating from them. Like, is there pushback within Thelema from like older generations that like younger generations are becoming more solitary? Because like, just to hit on like an overall point, like one thing that kept coming back to me is that a lot of times traditions like need that deviation in order to evolve, because otherwise they just like atrophy and then they fall out of public popularity basically. And like, I even remember in our interview you were saying that if it hadn't caught in this resurgence online with the younger generation, Thelema might have been out the door like decades ago.
Well, Thelema, if it doesn't change, is going to die. Like, I think we are all aware of that. We just don't want to admit it. Like, the Thelema order population is aging. Their numbers are going down. But a lot of people are interested in Thelema. And a lot of the younger Thelemites don't feel drawn to these groups for a number of reasons. I mean, some of it is that Thelemites like to infight with each other constantly. Some of it is that people, they live in areas where they're like 4 hours away from the nearest lodge. Yeah. Obviously, they don't want to drive that every weekend, like there's a lot of reasons, but a lot of Thelemites, they are not going to do that anymore. I think that the mentorship AA lineage is a little bit more staying power, but yeah, I mean, Thelema needs to evolve to whatever's happening, and there has been pushback. There are some people who sort of consider these eclectic online Thelemites like not real Thelemites. I think what's happening in Thelema is literally just what happened with Wicca in the 90s. I've said this a million times. I call it Wiccanization, like spiritual balkanization, basically. We're literally just doing what Wicca did in the 90s. Like, I don't know why people aren't admitting it. That's what's going on. Where there are all these people who are becoming solitary. They're younger. And of course, the older traditional people are not taking them as seriously because they're more eclectic. They're not as rigidly Thelemic on the whole. There are more women, and they see as the way that the traditional Wiccans saw the eclectic Wiccans who liked the craft and read Silver Ravenwolf in the 90s. Like, it's the parallel situation. I think every community sort of goes through this reckoning at any point in time. Like, we turn back the time to the 90s with Wicca. I mean, people thought that like teenage girls reading Silver Ravenwolf was going to be the death of witchcraft. Obviously, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
They either stopped practicing or ended up becoming community elders. And even if someone just likes Silver Ravenwolf, who fucking cares? Like, you know, it's. I think this is something that happens with every tradition. And I think people on the whole are scared of change, and they're scared of losing their holding power over the community. You know, because when things change, the ideology is inevitably going to change. It's going to end up looking different. Like, that's just going to happen.
Well, I saw pushback for a while, specifically regarding the Wheel of the Year, you know, to tie it into Wicca and Temp's book and stuff, where I always felt odd because I've never really had much of a connection to the Wheel of the Year in the traditional Wiccan sense. Um, the dates, like astrologically, the solstices, and the equinoxes, like there's importance there for star reasons, but the cross quarters, like I don't really connect with them in any way, shape, or form. And it was actually like in part Temp and her book, because she also ran like a small class about this that I was in, small class at the time, about customizing your own wheel. And I felt odd for so long being like, I don't really do anything for these holidays, because the time of year that is marked by these ideas, like the turning of the seasons, they're not on those dates for me. They're very much off. Like, it's already been hot as hell in the summertime, and some years it doesn't get hot until well into July, so June is not really the time for like hot summertime. Yule, it's been freezing cold for well over a month, and the days of all, it never made sense to celebrate on these days, and it felt odd, like even knowing that these dates are supposed to be symbolic representations of these things, right? I still felt weird because there is a sort of distance from the community where everybody's celebrating on Samhain, and you're like, cool, I'll be here. And it felt so awkward until speaking with people like Temp, who were like, yeah, I don't really do that stuff either. Like Temp directly being like, make your own, like, here's how you do it, I'll show you, like, let's go through and do that. Like that was the first real key time that I had seen more than just one or two fringe people being like, I don't either. And it's not just non-Wiccans, because a lot of non-Wiccans still follow the Wheel of the Year in some way, shape, or form, because a lot of those dates are significant across many traditions. They're astrological types of dates. But I always felt a little bit ostracized, and it's nice to see personally that eclecticism, when it comes to certain things that are longstanding traditions, like the Wheel of the Year, being broken away from because other people also do not connect with them for their own reasons.
Yeah, I'm the reverse. So I'm a Thalemite, and Thelema does have holidays. Thalemic holidays are very there. They exist. We have some random ones. We do celebrate the 4 points, like the solstices, equinoxes. We don't celebrate the cross quarters, but a ton of Thelemites do celebrate the full Wheel of the Year. We have for a long time. Some people even made like cute names for them to make them sound more Thalemic. So we have like alternate names for the cross quarters now, that like 4 people use. But we basically have like co-opted the Wiccan wheel because Wicca came after us, but they did a way better job with holidays than we did. So that's an example of syncretism.
Well, Wicca did not do a way better job with holidays. Like, let's really talk about that, because it's so important to why you should create your own wheel. Is that there were only 4 holidays on the Wiccan wheel. Yeah. They were the solstices and the equinoxes. And then the Wiccans were like, hey, we like to party like way more than 4 times a year. Let's just stick a day in between all of these, call them the cross quarters, pull random fucking names. So, yes, I think like in the flavor of Wicca, because really it wasn't about celebrating that exact day. It was just like gathering, like getting together to circle, gathering people. It was about community, because they didn't all gather all the time. So these were days where they would gather consistently. I think that flavor can be brought over into any practice. Like, who says that you need to celebrate a holiday on October 31st when that's not even the real cross quarter day? Like, you don't have to.
Yeah, can you talk about how the dates are kind of slightly wrong? Because I think people get really confused by that.
Well, the solstices kind of change every year. Like they're at different times, like when it happens. So if you're really taking a cross quarter day, you would calculate the exact midpoint between the equinox and the solstice that you're looking to do, and then that would be the true midpoint. But people like to have a fixed calendar, so they fixed it. So October 31st became Samhain, even though it's usually like November 4th, 5th, 6th, somewhere in there. And that happens for like all the cross quarter days. If you really did the math.
Yeah. Well, just the concept of the cross quarters always felt a little odd. I don't know. And I've spoken, boy, I know I've mentioned it somewhere. I swear it was on this podcast, but I have more of a where I am kind of practice. And I wonder if maybe I don't know that I would call it aversion, but my lack of connection to the wheel maybe stems from growing up in Florida because, I mean, Temp, you know how it is. Christmas Day could be 60 degrees some years. Like,
Oh, I thought that snow was a fake until I was like, so I was a kid when we moved out of New England, and so like my strong childhood memories are mostly in Florida until I was a teenager and I moved again. But like I can remember being like 5, 6, somewhere in there, and being like, snow's not real. Like that's a thing that I deadass thought it was an elaborate joke that people did, like Santa Claus. Like I thought that's what it was. I didn't think it was a thing.
magic water.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a disconnect for Floridians in the wheel, but I when I really started adjusting my wheel was much after my notebooks were stolen in Ohio. Was when I was living in Montana, and it was so cold. We used to get these Arctic drifts, and like the first snow of the season would happen in like September, and I was like, how the like because I was doing earth based paganism and all that shit like at that time. So I was like, how do I connect it? And so at that point, I started realizing you have to kind of redo your wheel every year based on like locationally where you are, like on the globe. And then there's so much, I think, nuance to the word wheel, because the wheel should not be just holidays that you celebrate. Your wheel encompasses who you are. It's your observation calendar. It's your devotional calendar. It's so much more than just like, oh, I'm getting together to party with these few people or whatever. So it's like when you set people, do the whole New Year's resolutions. Like when I'm setting my New Year's resolutions every year, I'm readjusting my calendar. What has become a priority to me? What's important? What am I going to be celebrating or recognizing or observing? Who died? Who was born? And that's like all encompasses your wheel. So no, I mean, I recognize that's non-standard interpretations of the Wiccan interpretation, but the way that Wiccan books present the wheel is very Gardnerian,
very rigid.
So
yeah, for me, like I'll give some examples. We could maybe go through this. I don't know, Anthony, if you have like a rigid wheel like Georgina does or not, if you're a little bit more like we are. But like for me, MLK weekend was always really important for my family because my family is very small. So there's not a lot of us to connect to. So every MLK weekend, we would go to my grandma's place, which was the other side of the state. So you go straight across. It's like a 4-hour drive. And we'd go stay with her. It was a fun time. Our tradition was we would meet in the middle, the exact middle in like a nowhere town at a very specific McDonald's. Like this was our McDonald's. We would have lunch together. Oh, I'm serious. Like this is it was at the top of a hill. There's one hill in this entire town. You meet at the top of the hill, and that's where the McDonald's is. So you'd go to McDonald's, have lunch, swap the kids from mom to grandma or grandma to mom, depending on the end of the weekend. And then you'd go hang out with grandma for the weekend, have a great time. Like that was our tradition. So for me, like MLK weekend is family time for me. It's just like a real special thing. But we've never been a religious family, so Christmas is just hang out and exchange gifts. It's not really anything big. We don't even do a tree anymore because that's just hassle. Like it's not what we do. And my brother's birthday
is bad take.
But my brother's birthday is 2 days after Christmas, so it's also never been like fully just Christmas. It's Christmas and his birthday.
Okay, so like I gave birth on the solstice, and you don't see me being like, it's December 21st. Like, guess I can't have a Christmas tree.
It's a lot of work to take up and down. We have cats that try to knock it over. Okay, that's just what it was. None of us cared about the
Fake
tree.
Norse
We got together.
practitioner. Fake Norse practitioner.
We had a plastic tree my entire life, so yes, correct. But like for us, that's what it was. Christmas was family time. You get together, you hang out. Our family tradition is you watch Elf. Okay, every year we watch Elf. I love Elf. I think it's very fun. That's us personally. My birthday is in the middle of June, so instead of the solstice, it's more like, yay, it's my birthday. So I do my birthday instead of the solstice. Like Gemini season is me season.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we'll go in a little bit about what I do. I am kind of like, at least my experience growing up was like almost like the opposite, because like my family was super duper religious, and so like they mostly just observed like Easter and then like Christmas, Thanksgiving. They kind of did Halloween and shit like that. And so like growing up like pagan, like I've told you guys before, I tried to hide a lot of it from my family growing up, and so it was very easy to like celebrate like the Wiccan holidays, like because they fell in line with like the Christmas, Halloween, like all that stuff towards the end of the year. It was easier to celebrate those more major ones like Samhain and Yule. But like the thing is that with that, I never really like, for one, I had a very superficial understanding of what the holidays were even for, like for a very long time. And so like I didn't think about it too hard. But as I got older, I realized I didn't really connect with like any of the other holidays besides like Yule or Samhain. And then doing more introspection, I realized that's just because like that was just how I grew up. Like my family just put a lot of emphasis on that time of year. It felt very special to me, and so like it translated naturally into like my pagan practice. But like it always just like once I had that realization, I just had this, I had a disconnect and I didn't really know how to resolve it for a really long time. And I thought that I was kind of just a bad like witch for not being able to connect with the holidays like that. And so I just went through the motions of observing them for a long time, but didn't really get a lot out of it. But then it was actually Temp's book that actually kind of like radically shifted the way I viewed that entire thing. And it goes into what you were saying, Nike, too, about like really needing to like, how do I put this? Like cater it to like your specific situation. Like I know we talked about it geographically, but also like for me, it had a lot to do with like my own personal UPG, like being able to incorporate like my actual personal beliefs into how I celebrated the wheel. And so like after I had that, like after I read Temp's book and I had that realization, I was like, oh my God, I don't have to do any of this, like how anyone else is telling me to do. And so like the one thing especially that hit hard was, I think me and Temp were talking in the interview we did for my podcast. Temp brought up about how like we were talking about like why it's important, or not important, but like why it can be helpful to celebrate the wheel. And she was mentioning how like during like Yule, she was talking about like the wheel as she follows it has a lot to do with like the changing of the seasons. And so like for Yule or Samhain, like as we go into the harvest time and then into the winter, it gives her an opportunity to focus on like death and focus on like the things we're leaving behind and like how she wants to create her new year. And like that, I don't know why that clicked for me so hard, but it just made me realize like the wheel that we're creating, we can tailor it however the fuck we need to so that it fits whatever we're going through at whatever point of life we're at. And so since reading Tem's book, I haven't followed the wheel so rigidly anymore, and I've been more like following things as like case by case, I guess I would say. It's been a lot more like astrologically or observing like moon cycles or things like that, like things that are pertinent to whatever I'm going through in life. Like I remember there was the big transit with like Saturn and Jupiter that happened last year, and like yeah, the Great Conjunction. There was a lot of personal stuff going on for me at that time. And so like I was working very heavily with that like progression of energy astrologically, and it helped me map out like what I was like the changes I was going through in life. Or like I'll do the same thing like mapping out different like moon cycles or stuff like that. And so it's not even so much like following the wheel of like the seasons at some point for me. It's more like just following natural rhythms in general and like picking and choosing the ones that are helpful for me personally.
Because the wheel's supposed to symbolize changing. I do not claim the wheel's supposed to symbolize like change and whatever.
Yeah,
And part of the philosophy behind eclipses is that it sets the tone for the next 6 months. So
right.
when you have the two eclipses that happen within the 2 weeks of each other, that's sort of the tone, like where they are, what's around them, what's with them, whatever. That
Hmm.
sets the mood for that 6 months. And so for following astrological stuff, there's the equinoxes are really big, especially for solar stuff. There's the moon cycles, but specifically with the eclipses, that's a big one that I'll follow. Just generally, because it does set that tone. And so it's like, what do I want to focus on? What are going to be the major themes? The ones coming up are going to be very interesting for me. So I'm very much enjoying that. So we'll see what's going on. But, for me, it's easier to follow the larger events. But when it comes to the seasonal changes with things like going into fall or going into winter, that is much more of a thing that I cannot predict because I don't know when our first snow is going to be. We might
Right.
get some flurries tonight, but like a snow, I have no idea when that's going to be. It changes every year. So for me, it's more of like I'll take time when those things happen. Like I'll go collect some snow from the first snowfall of the year or something. And I celebrate when the last of the major snows happen around mid-April, but I can't really predict when we're going to get that last mid-April dump of snow to
Yeah.
mark the official end of winter into spring because I know what the last one looks like. It's difficult because you can't predict it, and I think that's what is hard for some people because there is no rigidity. It's flying by the seat of your pants, no fucking guidebook to help you because you don't know when this is going to happen. Nature predicts it, and that's it. The stars you can predict to a T. You can follow lunar cycles. You can follow the eclipses. You can follow when the sun enters Aries and when it enters Libra. You can't do that for that final snow of the year. It happens whenever it's going to happen, and that's all that you get to do about it. And I think the lack of structure makes people scared because our entire life we're used to just having structure. You follow what the church says, you follow what your teacher says, you follow what your parents say. You haven't had this level of control over what you're doing, especially when it comes to like religious worship, maybe ever in your life until you hit this point in witchcraft where you decide you might want to be doing the wheel of the year differently. And if it doesn't work for you, if you realize it doesn't work for you, you're left out in the void, in the darkness, because there is nothing there to help tell you what to do. And that's hard for some people who need that structure.
And Thelema, as a Thelemite, our holidays are never brought up or emphasized. So a lot of people don't even know that we have them. I didn't know we had holidays for like a year, okay? I knew we had the 3 days of writing of the Book of the Law, because that's the one that everyone talks about, which is essentially the days the Book of the Law was received. We all sit in a circle and we have a little reading group. We read off the pages, right? Until the first time I saw a full Thalemic calendar is when I got a copy of this, Mystery of Mystery, which, by the way, is a breakdown of the Gnostic Mass. It's not a general Thelema book. It's literally a, like, line-by-line breakdown of the Gnostic Mass. It's, like, one of those, like, kind of higher level, slightly tedious. It's a beautiful book. It breaks it down in, like, crazy depth. This entire book is on one ritual, right? And they have a page called the Thalemic Calendar. And the Thalemic Calendar is outlined in a paragraph in the Book of the Law. I'm going to read the paragraph. So, audiobook time. But ye, O my people, rise up and awake. Let the rituals be rightly performed with joy and beauty. There are rituals of the elements and feast of the times. A feast for the first night of the prophet and his bride. A feast for the 3 days of writing of the books of the law. A feast for Tahuti and the children of the prophet, secret, O prophet. A feast for the supreme ritual, and a feast for the equinox of the gods. A feast for fire, and a feast for water, and a feast for life, and a greater feast for death. A feast every day on your hearts in the joy of my rapture. A feast every night unto new, and the pleasure of uttermost delight. Okay, beautiful passage. No one knows how to celebrate the holidays based on that one paragraph, okay? That's what they give you. They're like, these are our holidays. No one knows what that means, okay? Crowley is ciphered. So what that actually means is we have the feast of the elements and times. Those are the 4 wheel holidays. Thelema just like gives them an element. That's how we explain them. So the March equinox is fire. The June solstice is water. The September equinox is air. And Earth is the December solstice. This is how we break them down, which I don't think is a very intuitive way of breaking down the holidays. I'm sorry, Crowley. I'm sorry.
This is why the candle yeeted itself.
I think it's good attributions, but I think it doesn't really give people a guideline for what they mean. I think it's very vague. And then it goes through the other holidays, whatever. Those are the ones we talk about. But yeah, I mean, the Thelema explanation of them is really vague and kind of confusing, and so I think that's why Thelemites tend to lean hard into the Wiccan takes on them. I mean, not Thelemites who are like super rigid Thelemites, but like the kind of eclectic Thelemites just kind of like default to Wiccan holidays, because our explanation of them are kind of confusing. There's rituals for each, but we don't really break them down that far, and they're not very emphasized. And as a Thelemite, once I actually understood what these meant, I actually started celebrating them and connecting with them, and I celebrate them pretty rigidly on the days. Though I do add the cross quarters because I, like the Wiccans, like parties. Okay, I like parties. I get the kind of like the L Sabbats. Those are the kind of the least important ones. But I do like the Wheel of the Year because it makes more intuitive sense than the Thelema way of explaining them, which is like very. And this is a problem you see with ceremonial magic. It's like a very heady intellectual way of explaining things, where when you follow the Wheel of the Year and you're not like super aware of all the correspondences, being like, this represents air with no more context doesn't really give you a guide on how to celebrate it. Like, I love Thelema, but I think a lot of people, if they try to celebrate the Thelemic version of these holidays instead of the Wiccan ones, which came after us and clearly took influence from us, people get really lost on how to do that. Besides copying the like OG rituals for them, it's like, I love Thelema, but I do think our holidays are something that really leave people confused. Because I was confused, so I'm assuming I'm not the only person who got confused by this. And once you understand it, it's great, but it's definitely like not the most intuitive way of explaining things. And so whenever people are Thelemites and they're like, "Hey, I don't really know what to do with this," I'm like, "Look, if you want to take influence from the Wiccans who really actually fleshed this stuff out a bit, even if they did so in a sometimes historically questionable way, I honestly, I give people the green light for that, to be honest. I think that's fine. Or even going full temp and, like, making an intuitive wheel, because our explanations of them are really vague, okay? You can add a lot to that, you know? You're not bound to whatever the word air means with no further explanation.
Yes,
Okay, this is air day. Good luck!
Well, we do that, like, regular pagans do that. Bread day. Tell me, what are you doing August 1st, okay? Like, I need to know.
That's about as bad as Crowley being like, this is the supreme ritual.
Bread day.
Bread day, supreme ritual. Maybe that's the Thelema bleeding into Wicca. They're like, yeah, we'll just tell them a word and like be like, figure that out.
Yeah.
Good luck.
GG's, boys.
As a Thelemite, I can critique aspects of Thelema, okay? This is one that I actually do critique a little bit. Okay? Shade.
Tea.
Every Thelemite agrees with me, though, okay?
Honestly, I'll be real with you guys. That was one of the other things that drew me away from the Wiccan wheel, or like the standard wheel that's based on the Wiccan shit. Nobody defined anything. Like, most of the books were just like, it's the solstice, it's the equinox, death on Samhain. Didn't say anything. That was it. That's just that was the entire description. I was like, listen, I need more detail than this, please. I'm literally neurodivergent, not a minor.
I'm neurodivergent, a minor. What does bread day mean? But like, no, can we talk about how everyone, look, there's some Wiccan Sabbats that everyone gets into. My favorite, Beltane. But there's Beltane, Samhain, Yule, and then the rest of them, people just kind of shrug.
Yes! Like, none of them seemed important. It was just like, Samhain, Yule. That was it. Those are the only two. And I was like, I need more than this. Okay, guys, like, no one gives a fuck about any of the rest of these holidays. No one gives a good description. No one says what you're supposed to do or why. Like, the why was always the big one to me. And I was like, why do we do any of this? What's the point? Looking at it astrologically would make a lot of sense if they talked about that, but they fucking don't. They just say, it's the equinox, and they don't say anything else about that. What does it mean for it to be an equinox? Nobody tells you. They just say that's what it is. Thanks, guys. So I never had any connection with it because there was no reason.
I made a accurate Wheel of the Year meme that I would like to read off.
Please.
That sums up everyone's understanding of the Wheel of the Year when they don't lie to themselves.
My friends hate me.
Somewhere. Yes.
It's
but
where is this?
Find that, I'm going to just say what I have to say is that Bread Day is horribly underrated. And here's why.
Explained it, I was like, oh, this makes sense.
Well, like bread day, aside from like all traditional reasoning on the wheat and the harvest and all that bullshit, let's talk about like the social justice aspects, because this community over the past like 5 or 6 years has gotten so involved in like social justice aspects that for them not to take the opportunity that bread day presents like just feels so silly to me. Like, you guys are out here every day screaming about God knows what, and then a holiday comes around where you can totally be like, you know what? Bread and wheat sparked so many riots throughout history. Like the French Revolution's right there. We have bread riots. We have the Conch Republic throwing bread at the literal U.S. Coast Guard because they wanted to secede. And you guys are like, you know what? Fuck bread. Don't want to do it. Dumb holiday. Like, I don't know. I just don't get it. Don't relate.
What the fuck is this meme? This is the best meme I've ever made.
I believe in you.
I'm
Look,
gonna
I
find
eat
it.
carbs all year round, so bread days are not special to me because every day is bread day, okay?
No, every day is
Same.
not bread day because the first harvest in
I'm
England,
not
in
English farmer, thank you.
you know what? Like, if people want to, like, this is like not even a hot take. You can keep this in. If you truly, because there's a whole section of this community that like very sternly believes like decolonize your craft. If that is something that you preach, you should probably look at creating an alternative wheel of the year, because the wheel in itself has some problems it needs to work out.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where you cannot separate it from what happened to it. Okay, like Gerald Gardner was who he was. It was assembled under the conditions it was assembled. So it's one of those things where if you are really wanting to decolonize your craft and work on, realigning within whatever culture it is that you want, creating your own intuitive wheel is going to be like the super best option for you, because you can incorporate days of personal power to your heritage or to your culture or to your specific tradition, rather than using this pre-assembled Anglo-Saxon version of a wheel that's like not even that old. It's like what, 60 or 70 years old. So
Okay. I would
Do you
like
have your
to
meme?
read off my.
Can you post it?
Yes, I'm gonna.
'Cause I can
Yes, I'll
show
post
it.
it in chat, and I'm gonna do a reading of it for the ones listening. Oh, I almost put this in the wrong chat. Anyways, I want to read this. I just want to pause because this is how I think the average normie witch interprets the Wheel of the Year when they're honest with themselves. So, Samhain, everyone's favorite. Yule, based Christmas.
True.
Imbolc, irrelevant early Valentine's Day. Ostara, be like Rabbit's Day.
Wink
Bel-
face.
Beltane, Samhain too, but kind of worse. Litha, IDK, Sunday. Lamaze, nobody really cares, but bread is cool.
Lucas.
I'm not pronouncing that. I know. And then Mabon, shitty Thanksgiving, but nobody cares.
let's just go back. Go back to Lama. Say the other name again, Nike.
Lucas Naga. That's how I say it in my head.
Lucas.
Tell me that I'm not right, though. Okay, this is how every non-super versed witch sees the Wheel of the Year.
Correct.
Okay,
I'm not wrong.
I just want to point out that at no point does Mabon at all resemble Thanksgiving.
Everyone says it does.
In what way? It's an equinox.
Have you seen the witchy
I was
YouTuber
making that
call it
point.
the witch's Thanksgiving?
You know,
All
I
the
made
witchy
a point.
YouTubers say
Point
that.
about how nobody fucking explains anything. That's why they call it the witchy Thanksgiving, basically, without saying that directly. And then they
calls
don't
it-
say why.
Here's the thing. Okay,
Everyone
here's the
calls
thing.
it the witch's Thanksgiving. I will Google this to prove I'm right.
Here's the thing. I don't care what you Google because I don't need to know what the internet thinks. Like that's one of those things.
Here we go.
Like you can just look away from
Pinterest.
an accident.
Pinterest.
What is Mabon? Mabon, also known as the witch's Thanksgiving. Finance.yahoo.com says how to celebrate the fall equinox or the witch's Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Okay, I'm offended and intrigued, but mostly offended because like Thanksgiving is a super serious devotional act, and to be like, oh, this one day that everyone hates is basically like the witchy Thanksgiving. Like, no one is sitting down on the fall equinox and going, I am so thankful that the earth has provided me with the oxygen that I breathe and blah, blah, blah. Like, people aren't just sitting down doing that shit. I'm mad.
True. No, you're right. You know what makes me mad is that the wheel is not aligned with what you would think it would be, which would be like the solar movements, because some of them do, but Samhain does not. Samhain's 10 days late. Why?
Mhm.
You could have it be when Scorpio season starts, but no,
Well, it's
you
because
motherfuckers
Halloween
are
is
lame,
fun.
boring.
Yeah,
Fuck
Halloween's
you,
fun.
lame.
I
Yes,
want
Halloween
Halloween.
is fun. I want it separate. Okay, I want Halloween to be a separate day because that's fun. You get to have your fun Halloween day, and you can have the start of Scorpio season be when you have fucking Samhain because it represents those things. It makes me mad because it's offset. I'm so like Yule, fucking the June one, the other one, the solstices, those match up.
The June
Why not the
one,
other
the
ones,
June
huh?
one.
It makes me mad. There's no order to it. It's upsetting. It makes me
Mhm.
upset. It's why I like the astrological stuff better because there's so much more of a rigid system. You can follow something, you can celebrate it however you want. If you know astrology, you can celebrate it within your own chart and what that means for you every single year. You can celebrate a new year on your solar return, whenever that is. Make your birthday a real special part of your year. Like there's so many ways you could do these things, but everyone's just like, no, we'll have it be 10 days late. Fuck you is why. Thank you. I love it. That makes me so happy.
How would we all use the same hashtag on the same day then, though?
Honestly,
Really,
I
though.
kind of like seeing everyone's altar post for the Wheel of the Year. I look, but
That's true,
personally,
it's
okay,
cute.
I like holidays, and Thelemites don't do enough for their holidays, so I have to live vicariously through another religion. Okay,
That's
okay.
I love holidays. I love them. They're
Holidays
like my favorite.
are fun. Holidays are fun. I just wish that the holidays that
Why don't
were
we
like
make
the big
more of
common thing
them?
made more sense.
Can we? You want to know
I
what?
agree. We can
I
make
talk a
holiday.
lot about this whole return to tradition meme. We should go back to when the pagans used to have week-long festivals. Okay,
Yes.
can we
Amen.
bring
Thank
that
you.
back?
Can I just say, like, when my practice was much more Greek, I liked that they had a bunch of stuff going on because there was like monthly stuff, there was particular
It's
days of the year that were really
fun.
special. They had these things and they were connected to like certain cycles and I liked that a lot. I haven't looked a lot at Norse pagan holiday traditions just because I don't care so much about holidays, so it's more of like a back burner learning subject. But I liked that about the Greek practice where you had different things every month, not just for like the supper for I don't know how to pronounce her name. I always get it wrong. Hecate. Hecate feels weird now. Okay,
All
Hecate.
answers are acceptable.
Every month for Hecate, you do the special supper for her and the ghosties, and that's a cool, fun thing for the ghoul boys. And there's like every month you do certain things for certain gods, but then certain months of the year are really special ones, like really big ones, and you have like the week long festivals. I think that's really fun. Okay, I like that, and it made more sense because it was every month.
Mhm. That's what I do regularly is the Diepnon ritual for Hecate. Yeah, because it makes sense, like you said.
Yes.
Like it follows a natural rhythm. Like there's many centuries of explanation that go into it. Like it has that factor you were talking about where like they explained why, and it made sense, and it
And
was
they even give you
personal to me.
exactly what to do. Here's what you do and
Exactly.
why you do it.
Exactly.
Don't the Norse have ones though? Like they have
They do. I
holidays.
just don't know what they are.
Ah,
I'm a good Norse pagan.
They're
Nice.
blots, and we all know that Yule is one of them. So
yeah, Yule's the one that I know. You guys are kind of. I think the Norse are kind of like the Thelemites, where they just don't emphasize that shit, and so everyone's confused.
well, the Nordic holidays are way heavier, to be quite honest. Like I did some like preliminary research for it when I was doing like wheel stuff because I was wondering if I wanted to include more about them, and like they're really heavy.
They're pretty intense.
They're really intense. They're not like Thalemic holidays. Being
Where we
like,
sit in a circle and read a book.
yeah, they're not kumbayaing. Like, let's just put it that way. Like, it's just an ever changing thing, and it should be changing. Like, your practice should evolve and it should grow, and you should allow it to grow. Like, for personally, like my practice has gotten extremely more involved with death over the past year. Maybe even a little longer. Like, especially since like me and Anthony chatted the very first time for his podcast was like death has always been a super relevant portion of my practice, But like over the past year, I really kind of embodied and encompassed death and void into my practice and my life. And so like every single opportunity, it's become like a death opportunity, because like winter is dying for spring, which is dying for summer, which is dying for fall. And it's like the ever changing seasons and cycles of our life. So it's like my practice has gotten like super heavy.
Like a
like
fungus.
Personally. Yeah.
Fungus that lives off death.
Fungus among us.
You're a mushroom lady now.
Basically.
The bisexual energy is strong in you now.
Yeah.
We claim you.
Thank
My
you.
practice has literally been doing the opposite. I had a very, very Saturnian heavy practice for a very long time. And the past, like, bit of time, I've been really pushing away, not away from that. I still work with Saturnine stuff really heavily, but I've been trying to find balance. And so I've moved away from death, and I've been slowly but surely embracing life. I've been exploring beyond the will part of Thema and into the sort of love.
Mine ebbs and flows a lot, where it's very cyclical in nature. It feels every part of my practice feels very mercurial in a way, where I'll start by looking at tradition, then I'll move away from tradition, then I'll learn about more things in tradition, and I'll move away from that tradition. Like it just sort of flips back and forth, and I'll have some traditional stuff incorporated and some eclectic stuff incorporated, but what I'm focusing on incorporating at that time will really shift around until it sort of settles in this middle ground 50-50, very mercurial of me, where some of my really like hardcore practice, like some of it is very traditional, some of it is very eclectic, and they mix together really hard. Like I might celebrate some more traditional things. I might do traditional ways of worshiping the gods or some of the specific holidays or whatever. But I might also do the MLK weekend where I focus on family. Like that mixture over time really develops, but it's taken a long time. And I mean, like Tim said, it'll always be changing and mixing and evolving and growing. The more things that I learn, the more things I learn to incorporate, and the more that I choose to stray away to find these new ways to incorporate things into the tradition.
Yeah, no, I think so. For my practice personally, it's very similar to Temperance's in that death is like a very big emphasis for me. And like for years now, I've worked, my two main deities that I've worked with are Hecate on the one end and then Santa Muerte on the other hand. And so like yeah, it's extremely heavy. It's like those two different currents of, yeah, e- amen, exactly. Exactly. No, and fucking so that's the thing is like it is very heavy on the death aspect in that, and within that, like I've gone through a progression of different understandings on what that really means for me, and what I'm settling into as an adult, I think, is like death very much represent it's like Temperance was saying, like spring is the death of fall and then summer is the death of spring. Like death is very much like a process that leads into something new, and so for me, like that reverberates through the rest of my craft in that like Nike said, actually very similar to that, is my craft will go through like cycles where like I will be very, very, it feels like it's everything's like very, very close and like personal, and like I don't really let a lot of people in. I don't really take in a lot of new information. I'm just like deconstructing a lot of my own internal drama or doing shadow work or deconstructing like problems in my life or things like that. And then like a lot of that magic will be very much like meditative. Like I don't really do a lot of active spell work. And then it'll go through a different cycle where it's like I was saying, like death is a transition into something new. Like we leave that aspect where like I'm deep down in my own internal underworld, and I'll go into that next cycle where like I'll come out of all of that death, and then like you were saying, Nike, like I'll start studying like whatever is relevant in my life. Like I'll start studying like how like historical pagans have approached the problem, or like what different religions have like specific beliefs about like whatever I'm focusing on, and then like all of that will kind of amalgamize, and then by the time it's interesting how it times out. By the time I'm done learning whatever specific tradition or lesson or whatever I need to, like out in the normal world, it'll be time to go back internally and then like enter into that death period again and like deconstruct it all over again. And so and for me, like it's interesting because like we're talking about customizing our crafts, and like it feels honestly like my craft is almost nothing but customization because of that reason. Because like whatever beliefs I had even maybe like 6 months ago, they will be completely deconstructed and changed like now, or like the beliefs I have now could be gone by next week, or like any number like that. And like my practice, even like even when we started this podcast, like my practice has evolved so much just in that short amount of time in and of itself. So like, honestly,
That's why books are cool, to be honest, because they're just snapshots into a writer's life. Like, it's what they believed at that point in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if you've ever read an author, like, a really good example of this is Christopher Penchak. He's got, like, 1 million books out.
Yes.
And so you can, like, really see the evolution of who he is and how his spiritual journey went, just, like, from reading his books kind of, like, start to finish. But any author that has more than, like, 3 or 4 books, if they're publishing over a 5 to 10 year period, you're going to see evolutions in that practice that they present.
Exactly.
Well, what the thing that's always really interesting to me is watching traditions evolve through multiple people. So one of the examples that I saw with this was my gay astrology book, where they mentioned studies that had been done in the 1920s, doing like studies on homosexuality with astrology and some of the thoughts behind it. So they mentioned the 1920 study, they mentioned their study, which was in the 1980s, and then they said, who knows where it'll be in 50 years. So it's this acknowledgement that things are going to change over time, and I don't know that I would call it excitement, but more of like the curiosity of where people are going to go and how things are going to evolve. There is an encouragement in some ways, depending on the sphere, but in this particular context, there was encouragement of, the obvious that thinking is going to change, philosophy is going to change, science and medical and social things are going to change, and that evolution is seen as entirely natural, especially with astrology in particular. Evolution and change are part of the nature of things. It's constancy and change mixing together, and how that's just how things are, that's how things go. They're always changing, but they're always constant, they're always cyclical, and that's allowed. And I feel like that lesson is really important, to allow yourself to roll with these changes, because they're not supposed to be just one rigid system. You're not supposed to say that this is the only way it's ever meant to be, because obviously it's not going to be how it is. And I think on the broader scale of traditions on the whole, and in your own personal practice, that's the big one. Like, why should it stay the same forever? If you stay the same forever, what's the point?
Well, the whole idea of magic is that it's using the will to make change. If you're not changing, you're not doing the thing. Like, what's the point of going on a spiritual journey, which implies going from one place to another place, if you're not willing to change? At that point, it's just like being an aesthetic, right? Your spirituality should change you. You should not recognize who you were before. That's the whole point. Otherwise, like, why?
Well, a lot of people find spirituality and religion specifically because of a fear, and usually that fear is of death. And so not everyone comes into this with the end goal to change or to be enlightened. It's something that brings them comfort. And at the end of the day, that's kind of valid too. Like, you don't have to join spirituality or religion to pursue some greater sense of enlightenment or bettering of yourself. Like, you can come into this and just to be okay doing what gives you any brief shred of comfort and joy in this life. If your life is hell and this is what does it for you, good for you.
See, but I feel like, there doesn't have to be this giant overarching change. I think that you are supposed to change, it's just not in the way that we think. Like, I don't think that you are meant to have these giant transformations, and who you are today should be a whole new person from yesterday, because obviously it's not going to be the case. I mean, as much as I am very different from me at 10 years old, there are still remnants of that same person in there underneath. But when I mean rolling with changes and accepting those things and being able to move with it, I mean more of like, a 20-year-old's going to be different from a 50-year-old, and you're going to have different life changes, you would assume. Like, the typical ones are marriage or kids, if those are your thing, or just getting older. I mean, for those of us who menstruate, like, the starting of menstruation, the ending of menstruation, your body changing as you go through puberty, and then as you become older and you get wrinkles and your hair grays and your body starts to deteriorate, like those kinds of natural changes that take place over a long time. Some people have difficulty accepting those kinds of changes, where things get kind of weird and scary, and some of it does relate to, that fear of death and looking for comfort. But I think that it can be a help with accepting those changes as you near death, because, not to be so morbid about it, but every day you're marching closer to death. So like, being able to accept the longer term changes that your life goes through is more of what my viewpoint is. There can be the broader, greater ideas, grander ideas of things changing over time, but I think just the change of me at 20 versus me at 26 versus me at 30 versus 40, 50, whatever, like those are the changes that I think are good for people to learn to roll with, even if it's just learning to roll with it through the comfort of Jesus, is the typical case that I usually think of.
My final thoughts are that there's nothing wrong with customizing your practice. Obviously, you're gonna want to do something with some logic to it to avoid falling into like LARPer territory, because that's not good. We don't want to LARP. But if you are taking it seriously, you're putting in the effort to understand things, to, know what you're doing, then I think that you're good to go. Just be researched, use logic, use the knowledge you have, and take notes from your unverified personal gnosis. And through that, you'll be able to forge the practice that works for you.
I'll keep mine real short. Let's speed run this. Hot take, change is good. And I don't resonate with the wheel, and you don't have to either.
End quote. Okay, perfect.
End quote.
I think my final thoughts are that I'll echo what my co-hosts have said so far. Change is good. I think, as we've mentioned, I love that Temperance brought this point up about like our spiritual practice doesn't have to be about like personal evolution, but just in my own personal experience, my practice has brought me personal evolution and change to my life, my beliefs, and all kinds of other things without my willingness. And so if you are on the spiritual path, I think it can be prudent and it can be wise to watch out for those subtle types of changes, and the more open we can be with them, and the more you can, I guess we're talking about customizing your practice, so the more you can figure out a way to personalize your spiritual practice and your craft to meet those changes, I think you're going to be better off in the long run.
My final thought is that you don't need myself or anyone else to give you permission to practice your craft authentic to yourself. So if you want to do something or if you don't want to do something, either way, it's 100% valid, and you shouldn't look to books to tell you that you're valid just the way you are.
Patrons, you're really cool, and you help us keep the show going. You support us very much, and we love you for that. So if you do the $10 tier or more, we get to thank you by name. So big special extra thank yous to Adrius, Amy, Evan, Hamda, Halsey, Jonah, Lita, A Sociology of Tarot, Alejandra, Angry Pratt, Anna, Doitsu, Jay, Jessica, Lee, Leo, Lilith, Marcelo, Marshall, Mike, MK Scorpio 89, Nauseated, Neon, Nicole, Rowan, The Lady Ghost, Victoria. Thanks to all of you guys. You're very fucking cool.
And if you want to support this show and keep this podcast going for God knows why,
forever,
you can find us on Patreon. We're never ending. You will never make us stop. And you guys enable us to never stop. You can get your name read off, which is obviously the most exciting reward. But beyond that, you get our pre-shows, which are my favorite part of the podcast. You get extended versions because I like to clean up what we release to the public. So if you like some extra spice, get those. We release extra episodes every Sabbath or so, allegedly. And those episodes typically are topics we don't want to cover on main, so they're fun. And you also get access to the shows early. So that's all very, very exciting. If you want to support me, I'm Georgina Rose, or Dot Darling, D-A-T. It is not the textile, it is the Sephora. You can find me on, and I made a list this time, so that I make sure I hit all my platforms, because I recently have been fucking up my own plug at the end. So you can find me on Instagram for now, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, Telegram, Patreon, and this podcast on all major podcasting platforms. Oh, and you can also donate to me on Ko-Fi.
I'm Nike. You can find me at the Warrior Rich Nike pretty much everywhere. I have a link tree because I don't like to remember all my shit. I'm around, mainly Instagram, YouTube, and here. Also, we have a Discord server for this podcast. If you didn't know, that should also be linked down below. We're very cool. I'm very cool. My people are cool because I also have my own Discord server. Follow me everywhere because I'm extremely awesome.
Yes. If you want to follow me, I am Anthony Wolfe or at Anthony the Witch on Instagram and Twitter, and I think that's about it because I'm not nearly as cool as my other co-hosts, but we have a good time.
That's lies.
And I'm Temperance Alden, and I have a book called Year of the Witch, and it's available pretty much everywhere books are sold. You can find me online by searching my name, Temperance Alden, and I'll pop up. I have too many different handles. Wildwoman Witchcraft is the most common, but I'm also at Tempora Apples on Twitch.